It probably won't shock you that cowboy boots aren't typically bought or sold online. So where is the modern cowboy supposed to shop? This week, we're talking to a founder who carved out a DTC market for Western wear.
You're listening to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. And today we're talking to Paul Hedrick from Tecovas, a Western wear brand sold directly to consumers and also in their brick-and-mortar stores. I'm Becca Skutak, and here with me is my very fashionable co-host,
Dominic Midori-Davis. And of course, before we get into our conversation with Paul, we have our two truths and a lie. And so at the end, we'll tell you which one of these statements just isn't true. So, which one of these statements is simply not true? Is it that Paul was rejected from business school, that most cowboy boots are made in California, or that the company was already profitable in their early years?
Ooh, listeners, you'll have to keep going through the episode to find out. But before we get to the conversation with Paul, if you wouldn't mind rating and reviewing the show, you can do so wherever you are already listening to this episode, so it's super easy peasy, and we would really appreciate it. But without further ado, here's our conversation with Paul. Hey, Paul, how's it going?
It's going great. How are y'all?
Hanging in there. Can't complain. Thanks for coming on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And before we dive too far into this, the most important question I'm going to ask you the whole podcast right up front. How many pairs of boots do you own?
I think I just counted and I had 80 pairs in my closet. I have a special boot closet just for boots, although I think I just got rid of about 30. Finally, I did some spring cleaning to make room for 2024 and 2025 styles and gave some away.
Perfect. Well, speaking of boots, why don't you tell us a little bit about Tecovas?
Yeah, of course. So Tecovas, we are a Western brand. We're based in Austin, Texas. We're in our 9th year, so still in the single digits here. We design, make, and sell directly to customers what I would consider to be the best quality, most comfortable, stylish cowboy boots on the market. And we also sell some pretty amazing Western apparel and accessories.
And I got to know, I mean, you're in Texas, so I can kind of imagine at least part of the backstory. But what made you want to launch this company from the beginning?
Yeah, I was actually in New York when I thought of the business idea. So I'm born and raised Texan. I was born in Houston, raised in Dallas, started my career in consulting. And then my second stop was at a private equity firm that focused on consumer and retail. And that was really the beginning of my, I think, career orientation. I really love brands. I love retail. I love hospitality. I thought I might want to get into restaurants or hotels. I can get back to that later. But at this firm, I applied to business school, like a lot of my colleagues, post-MBA school. I got rejected from the only 2 schools I applied to, and I was left in a lurch. And about 10 years ago, this spring, and it was a little bit of a come to Jesus moment for me. I had been just kind of working my butt off, getting the jobs I thought that I wanted. And I got into a couple of my dream jobs. And it wasn't until that moment that I thought about becoming an entrepreneur. And I got to that decision by doing some self-reflection, really. I realized I was a lot more risk tolerant than most of my colleagues and friends. And I realized I also had this creative side that I really had thought I would make into my career when I was younger. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist or a cartoonist and later an architect. And I hadn't really flexed my right brain in a long time. And it was the combination of those factors and thinking about the skills I had gotten in, 4 or so years out of college. It was pretty naive. Thought it was enough to jump off the ledge. And then I started thinking about ideas. And I had been wearing cowboy boots to the office pretty much every day by that point in my second year.
Did you wear it with a Patagonia vest to the private equity office or no?
I actually don't think I had a Patagonia vest, ironically, but I was living in Manhattan, commuting to Greenwich, Connecticut. And so, yeah, it was definitely a little out of place wearing boots, but I was proud of my Texanness and wanted to stand out. Yeah, so basically I started digging into that industry and man, I fell down a rabbit hole. I fell in love with the products. I was already into them, as a consumer, but I wasn't, an enthusiast by any means. But I knew enough about the industry to be a little dangerous. And then I started digging into it. Luckily, I was able to find some more information about the industry, and it was way bigger than I thought it was. I thought it was maybe, $100, $200 million worth of boots sold in the US. It turns out the number was closer to 3 or 4 billion. And more importantly, there was a gap in the market. So there was a brand gap. And for me, it was a significant brand gap. It was twofold. There wasn't a brand that was making high quality, stylish, comfortable boots that didn't cost a whole paycheck. And there wasn't anyone thinking about changing the way the consumers bought boots. And that was the combination that I kind of went for and decided to start the first direct-to-consumer cowboy boot brand and selling them exclusively over the internet. But also, more importantly, the product itself was filling a pretty big gap in the category, in my opinion.
So was the market like there were these kind of big legacy players who had been there forever, or there were newer people as well? Or like, how big was the gap?
Yeah, mostly older heritage players. I mean, as you can imagine, it's cowboy boots. It was a little bit of a dusty category. It was pretty behind the times in terms of marketplace adoption. I had done some research into e-commerce penetration for different categories. And, the percentage of cowboy boots that were sold online was in the mid single digits, whereas footwear overall was in the high teens. So there was like a double digit point gap, in penetration. By the way, this is back when e-commerce was only about 20% of retail sales overall. So that was a pretty big distinction. And then, on the brand front, there was a bunch of brands that were founded 100 plus years ago, and they kind of acted as such. Some of them were really great. They made great products, I'm not going to lie, but the ones that I really liked were even more than I would want to pay, making pretty good money. And then the rest of them felt not like me at all. There was a lot of lower priced boots that were pretty clunky and luggy and fit more into, maybe a construction environment and not necessarily wearing a nice pair of jeans and going to a concert, going to a date, wearing to a board meeting. So that was really the gap, in my opinion.
No, that's so interesting. And I'm curious because when you think about launching something like that, where it's like, okay, there are these legacy players, especially thinking about Texas, I imagine there's sort of a culture around products like this in Western wear. And what was it like taking the idea and actually turning it into a business? What feedback did you get? I'm just curious if anyone was like mean to you about it, like any like rough and tough about like the legacy of the Western wear, the legacy of the cowboy boots. Like, what was it like actually getting this off the ground once you had the idea?
Yeah, there's a lot of pushback among people that knew me well. I had a lot of support from my friends and family, of course, who knew that it was in my heart that I wanted to go, risk it all and create something out of nothing, which got me really excited, obviously. And so, but there were still a lot of people who said, wait, you're quitting your job in private equity to start a cowboy boot store in Texas? Because I actually moved to Austin in summer 2014, right after I quit. And I'm like, yes, technically, but there's a little bit more to the story. And I had a lot of people tell me to avoid the footwear industry. It's a really challenging industry. It's really SKU intensive because of all the sizing. It's really hard to figure out how to manufacture, how to design. So yeah, there was some pretty big barriers on the general business side. But what I discovered was that basically all the boots that I really liked, that I liked the way they were made. And there turned out to be one place in the world that everyone was going to make this product in Mexico. So that kind of solved one sourcing problem. Hey, I just got to go there and convince someone to work with me, which was no small feat, but at least it was simple. Then essentially, because of the birth of Shopify a few years earlier, I could theoretically get this whole thing off the ground with pretty minimal capital expenditure and have national reach on day one. Although, of course, I learned how hard it was to actually reach people. It's not free. But yeah, so the business pieces were actually, I'm not going to say they were easy, but it was a pretty easy list to make of all the tasks. So I flew down to Mexico. Luckily I spoke Spanish. I came down with some drawings and a PowerPoint presentation that I don't think I ever opened, trying to convince a couple factories to work with me. And, I was going to these really renowned artisan factories who've been making for all the most famous brands in the category and even some, non-cowboy boot brands that were really high end. And most of them told me no. One of them told me yes. And yeah, basically spent the next 6 months developing product with them, designing it from scratch, and ended up launching in October 2015 to the world with a little Shopify site, tecovasboots.com. I couldn't even get the tecovas.com URL at the time. It wasn't available. So I was off and running by fall 2015.
And before we move on, I have to know, because I'm always so fascinated to learn about these hubs that you're describing, where it's like, oh, well, if you're launching a company in X, like you have to go to this one random town and like that's where everyone does it. What is the town in Mexico like?
Yeah, it's called León. It's in the state of Guanajuato, which is right in the middle of the country. You can, if you're like balancing Mexico on your finger, it'd be right about there. It's beautiful. It reminds me of, I'd say, inland Southern California. So rolling hills, really temperate. The town itself is definitely a manufacturing focused town. There's some car factories and some industrial factories in addition to. What really made it famous, though, was leather. It had been one of basically the leading leather tanning capital of the Western Hemisphere since the early 1900s. And out of that kind of grew the cottage industry of shoemaking. It was definitely the Mexican shoemaking hub. And then as U.S. manufacturing and shoemaking started to shift overseas, it became really the North American shoemaking hub. So a lot of history, a lot of these, the factory that we ended up working with most of the last decade, for the most volume with, had been around for 80 plus years. I forget how many generations they're on right now. And actually the son of the guy that I've been working with for 8 or 9 years is now being trained to take over the business. So it's pretty cool to see. Very family oriented, very craft oriented, very human oriented. And so, there's machinery, of course, that you need to do welting and putting different parts of the shoe together in a way that makes it secure. But basically every piece of the boot has been put together by someone's hand. There's probably 100 people doing an aggregate of 200 steps to make each pair of cowboy boots.
And because you were talking about how some of the legacy cowboy boot companies were pretty high in price point. So how do you go about making kind of a more affordable, still high quality cowboy boot? Because this is a lot of effort and work to make the boots. Totally. So how do you still hit that, good price point?
Well, the main thing we did was just do wholesale at first. So we were paying relatively high prices being so small and our orders, not having a lot of buying power. So just being direct allowed us to have, what we'd call a full keystone of margin, which was enough, I think, to get the brand off the ground. Over time, of course, we've been able to, we're a larger player there now, and we've been able to get better pricing to allow for a multi-channel retail strategy. But the truth is it was a little naive to be able to, my strategy was let's put all of the costs into the product that we could possibly have because I wanted the boots to be better than anyone else's. And then let's just see if we can make money at X price. And we have raised our price a little bit over time, although I think we've barely kept up with inflation, if even. And essentially what's happened is we've realized we can work around it. We can offer pretty fair value. We don't have to just assume that there's a keystone for that person, a keystone for that person, a keystone for that person. We don't work with distributors today. We're still not working with any wholesale accounts. And effectively, some of the higher priced players just have a lot of extra padding in there. And to the other point I'd make is the higher priced players that I thought were really big, actually, some of them weren't really selling that many boots. And so we ended up actually becoming, essentially the biggest, premium player in the category.
And I also wanted to ask you about early days of marketing, because it seems like Cowboy is having a moment right now with Yellowstone and, of course, Beyonce. But how was it like in the early days in terms of marketing? And did you use influencers? Did you not? How did you go about that?
Yeah, so maybe a couple comments as it relates to trend. The thing I loved about this category and really Western in general, our mission statement is to steward the next generation of Western. And, every one of those words is chosen pretty carefully. Steward meaning because we think it's important that we treat it, with respect, because the great parts of Western culture and cowboy culture are worth carrying forward, meaning the shared values of, I'd say integrity, authenticity, trailblazing, welcoming, around the campfire. Like all of those values were really what we thought about. So that's one point. Second point would be the trends. It's funny because I was able to being from Texas and then working on the coast. I went to school in the Northeast. I worked in New York. I was able to see how kind of people on the coast thought about the universe and how, I experienced the universe, and it was pretty different. And I think long story short, most people on the coast dramatically underestimated the culture and the buying power of, maybe the rest of America. And although there wasn't a lot of cowboy boots being sold in New York or Boston or LA or SF, it's always been a huge category pretty much everywhere else. And so I never wanted Tecovas to be a trendy brand. I wanted it to be the brand that was going to last for decades, that was going to be the category leader, the challenger brand that took the reins and, again, stewarded that next generation. That said, because of how we approached it, from a values perspective. And we were always very determined not to stay in that old dusty universe of sort of gatekeeping. And there was definitely a little bit of an attitude among some people who wore boots every day, who grew up wearing boots culturally, who needed them for work, for example, who would say, hey, you can't wear cowboy boots if you're not a cowboy, if you don't need them for work, or if you're not from here. And we always took the attitude that that wasn't the case at all. I truly believe that almost anyone who put on a pair of at least our boots would actually really love wearing them and feel cool and confident, a little taller, have a little swagger, feel stylish. And I just thought that was a universal desire that a lot of people would want to scratch. And so the recent trends have been interesting. It definitely has bled into pop culture more than we ever thought it would. But this has happened before. This happened in the late 80s with Urban Cowboy. It happened in the 90s with the dramatic popularity of 90s country music, Garth and Shania coming out of that era. It happened in the early 2010s with country music really taking mainstream and becoming, since then, it's been the number one most favorited music genre in the country. Pickup trucks have been the number one selling car in the US for decades. It's always been there. It's just funny that people now notice it, and then people finally think it's appropriate to make it widespread. I would equate it to maybe Ivy League style being converted into global prep style by Ralph Lauren and Tommy in the 90s, and really that's how we think about it. I think I got a little off track on the question, but I really wanted to talk about the trends. I can talk about what we did in the early days because it is I guess interesting.
No, I'm glad you hit on that because I was also going to ask about the trends. But yeah, so I guess with all of that being said, so the early days of marketing were easy?
No, they were not. They were very scrappy in the first couple of years. Oh my gosh. I mean, I had sold everything that I owned, basically. I cashed out my 401k, paid that massive tax penalty that you really don't want to pay if you cash that out early. Not that it was all that much money. I was 26 when I did it. And, I got into a bunch of credit card debt. So I bought an old 4Runner, and that became my little mobile sales vehicle. And I would go to farmers markets. I basically promised myself. And then my first hire I made, Brandon, he and I, when he joined in December 2015, we said, hey, listen, man, we got to pay the rent with physical sales. I know we're doing this online thing, but we do not have enough money to test anything real online unless we're actually paying the rent with some physical sales. So we went to farmers markets. We went to my elementary school in Dallas, did a road trip there, sold 20 pairs of boots there, sold 5 here, sold 10 there. And that was really valuable because we ended up getting a lot of in-person experience. We kind of learned how to sell in person. We realized that this is the type of product that people really want to buy and experience in person. But we got a lot of customer feedback and we were able to iterate really quickly. So we had product market fit early. And as far as scaling revenue, I mean, honestly, the only thing that really worked for us in the first couple of years was social advertising. Now it's obviously not the strategy that you want to have as your only strategy. But back then, there really wasn't anyone else bidding on cowboy boot terms, on Facebook and Google at scale. And so we were able to pretty efficiently grow. We were doing, over 10 million in revenue our second year, just purely through performance marketing. Obviously, we had a lot of word of mouth too, but as far as like the actual growth scale, there was no way we could have gotten all those customers without doing some paid media. And we were break even from day one. We never really lost money because that was our mission. We kept the team super small. We had a little not very nice office on the east side of Austin. And, we focused on where the money was made. We always were really, really sales focused because we knew we had me who cared about the product, and I was not going to let anything get to the market and get on the customer's foot that wasn't, in my opinion, amazing. And so we could focus all of the team's energy on selling.
More from this conversation right after a quick break. Some of the points you brought up already made me want to ask you about how you think your career prior to this, working in private equity, especially working in private equity on the consumer side, has influenced your decisions as you've built the company, or how you have decided to approach different things. And yeah, I'm just curious, what do you think you were able to bring from that private equity career that has been able to help you as you have grown the company?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I've worked more than twice as long at Tecovas as I did in my entire previous career combined. But I did feel well equipped, to be honest. And I think that's because I had, like many entrepreneurs, a overconfidence. But the actual skills, so I worked at McKinsey and Company out of college, and then I worked at this firm on consumer brand that really we bought and sold consumer brands and restaurants and retailers. And at McKinsey, I'd focused on operations and costing and logistics, basically. And then later, that second job, I had focused on commercial strategies, so marketing, pricing, brand, sales. And so I kind of felt like I'd gotten a 4-year MBA, and I had all I kind of knew what the different parts of the business were, the different functions in a business. I was able to use my consulting and problem solving skill set to break down what may have looked like a challenging problem into a few steps discreetly, like I mentioned before. And then I also learned that there's a lot of ways to skin the cat in terms of growing and scaling and funding the business. And I think if there's one thing I took away is that I was comfortable with raising capital. And even though, there's a lot of ways to grow the company, I bootstrapped it until launch. And then I realized hey, we can grow it a lot faster if we put more working capital on the balance sheet. So pretty much every year we raised a little bit of private investor equity capital as well. And maybe we would have been better off not doing that. We may have been smaller, but I actually think we did it at the right time, and we feel really good, and we're going to give our investors a great return.
Yeah. I definitely wanted to ask you about the funding piece too. And the trends here have changed since you guys started the company, but with you guys being based technically out of the quote unquote, listeners, I'm doing air quotes, startup hubs being in Austin, the popularity of Austin as a startup hub has kind of come and gone and had sort of a roller coaster couple of years. But what was it like actually going out to fundraise for this? I know D2C, definitely some investors just don't like that category at all. And then it's you are coming into a category where people could point to other brands making boots as well. What was it like actually getting investors on board? Yeah,
so we are a D2C brand. Obviously, that 3-letter word seems to be almost derogatory these days. To me, D2C just means what's one part of your marketplace strategy. And today, it technically is our whole marketplace strategy because we're still just sold on Tecovas.com, and we've got 32 retail stores, although we might have a few more than that by the time this recording gets released. But raising money was challenging because in 2016, 2017, that period of time, a lot of brands were getting investment, but there were brands that, kind of, again, these coastal-based firms were investing in. Most of the firms were investing in sort of these millennial coastal-focused brands. And I think everyone thought that I was doing something niche, that we were doing something niche. And I was really only able to attract angels. I couldn't really get any institutional investors to invest in the first few years. It wasn't until we got pretty serious revenue traction and we were on track to do 30 or 40 million in our third year in business that we finally got people knocking on the door. And so we had about 2 or 3 years where we were able to meet the people that were still investing in D2C, and we had enough traction to be interesting. And then basically COVID hit and people lost interest in that. So we hit our window to get capital, I think. And so I feel, I guess, fortunate around timing, but at the same time, we were executing really well and we've used the capital really efficiently. And unlike a lot of the D2C brands that are sort of poster childs for either raising too much capital and not doing well, or not raising capital and doing well, we're kind of the people that straddled it. We were able to, bring investors on the cap table who really believed in our long-term vision, but also we were always, we were never getting over our skis too much. We were always raising rounds at prices that I felt were fair and that we would be growing enterprise value quite a bit, even just in a year, after that round. And so, I think we took our company values of being high integrity and humble but also trailblazing, ambitious, and combine those, I think, into a winning formula.
That's so interesting to hear you talk about the funding in that way, because I like the way you put it of just, we snuck in right before the window on D2C closed. Because I feel like there are a lot of companies that would fit into that kind of a bucket from other categories, but I haven't heard it put that way. I like that. I did want to ask you, because I know you mentioned a little bit earlier your journey of realizing that you did in fact want to start a company and what that moment was like for you. But we've talked a lot about building the company, but what has it been like getting Tecovas to where it is now for you personally as someone based on your past career history? Obviously, you were moving in the private equity track, which is a very different profession than starting a company of your own. So what has it been like personally running this company?
Well, man, it's been the greatest gift. I have to say, I'm very grateful for everything that's happened. I'm grateful to my past self for turning a rejection into an opportunity. But more importantly, I'm grateful for all the people who've joined and the people who've believed in, the product, and we have a lot of really fervent supporters. We always wanted our customers to be an extremely customer-led business. And, that kind of came out of some of my instincts around hospitality. I just realized, hey, if we just make this place an amazing place to work and an amazing retailer to experience as a consumer that only makes amazing products, like it's kind of hard to screw it up. But I think that those things will get us past a lot of challenges. I mean, they really did. For me personally, I think like most founder CEOs, although now I'm our executive chairman, in my CEO journey, the most rewarding part of it was definitely the part that I probably was the least excited about, which was building team and learning how to hire people and fire people and coach people and manage people. I'd never even managed a single person before starting the company. So I basically had all of my training wheels all the way through, racing cars in the big leagues or whatever through the course of 5-7 years at Tecovas. So that was really rewarding. And I'd say the other thing is it made me realize that, just because you're on a path doesn't mean that feels, commercially what the outside world would say is successful. Like a lot of people thought I was doing a weird zig or a weird zag when I was quitting. It doesn't mean you can't follow your heart. And for me, my heart was more in the creative side. It was in the product building side. I wanted to be a maker. I wanted to be a creator. I wanted to make experiences and products. And I cared a little less about what I think a lot of other people in my shoes might have cared about. And I'm glad I listened to those instincts.
And I know since you have stepped into the executive chairman role, we definitely wanted to ask you about that. How did you know it was time to make that transition? What went into that decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a hard decision to work through. When you create something like this, it's your DNA, it's your baby, it's something that's with you forever. I have it tattooed on my body.
Love that.
The actual origin of that decision for me came a few years prior when I realized I never really had like a partner who could, really share the burden at the top of the company. I never had a COO or a president figure. So a lot of what I was doing day to day was, I think as every year went by and the company got bigger and we went from, 10 people, 30 people, 70 people, 100 plus people at corporate, it felt like more and more of my day was more about operations, process, people, and the less of it was about brand, creative, strategy, all the things that I really enjoyed doing. And I realized that you could be a CEO that had a really amazing, like number 2 president COO type who could take on a lot of the company's day-to-day business, or you could hire a CEO to basically run the company day to day. And for a variety of reasons, mostly because I saw how big the future was of Tecovas. We had, by the time David, now our CEO, was offered the job, we were doing almost 150 million in revenue. We'd seen this path to get to 500 and beyond that to $1 billion, obviously over a longer period of time. I just realized like I didn't need to be defined by that role. I didn't view myself as someone who woke up saying, hey, I'm a CEO. I viewed myself as more flexible. I'm a founder. I can call myself something else and still get a lot of joy out of my day, have a huge impact, be the largest shareholder, coach someone new. And so by making that decision, I decided to flip that switch and convince the board to do so, which I'm very happy for their support. And we were able to, because it was that title and not a different title, we were able to bring on someone amazing who could actually really handle this company at scale and who could see the vision along with me. And we ended up hiring a guy who I'd met, I guess I'd met him 3 years prior. Now it's been 5. He was the COO at Deckers, which is the parent company that owns, Hoka and UGG. And so he'd seen Hoka go from 20 million to $1 billion in revenue, basically running the day-to-day operations of the shared services component of that massive corporation, and had so much wisdom, had so much affability, and he and I got along so well. I just knew I could trust him. And I don't think it would have happened if I hadn't met him. There may have been a few other ways the chips could have fallen, but really glad it worked out.
And thinking about your early days as a CEO coming from McKinsey and the world of consulting, what were some of those early days like? Because I imagine that is kind of an abrupt transition in terms of managing people and hiring. What were some of the lessons you learned? Maybe from did you learn who not to hire, or, did you learn about some leadership qualities that you have and stuff? What were those early days like?
Yeah, good question. I learned a lot. I felt like every day was a fire hose, and I felt like many days I was failing for sure. I tried to hold myself to a high bar, which usually meant judging myself pretty hardcore every day because it's hard to be performing at a high bar when you've never done that before and you don't have someone kind of helping you on the ground necessarily. I'd say a big change was realizing that the people who work at some of these sort of blue chip consulting, investing firms, they're all really similar personalities. And when you're building a business like this, you end up hiring a pretty wide variety of personalities. I don't mean lower caliber people by any means. I just mean lots of different types of functional jobs. I mean, basically everyone at the two companies I'd worked for previously had the same job. They were just kind of advancing and getting better and better and better at it. There's not really a lot of functional exposure. There's not, at a company that's 10 people, all 10 people might be working on a totally different function or job at a smaller business. So that was a really different dynamic. I don't know if I have a key learning from that other than just recognizing that I had to get really good at managing really different types of people at the same time of learning how to manage someone just in general, which was hard. I had to learn how to hire and fire. I'd say an early lesson on that front was hire slow and fire fast. It's a little trite. It's annoying to hear maybe from someone who's been in that seat if you haven't been, but it's one of those things. I've talked to other CEOs. I don't think I've ever met a single person who regretted firing someone. I've met a lot of people who regretted hiring people. And it just shows how important those decisions are up front and investing in that culture. Another thing I took from my previous job, which was uncomfortable, but I knew it would help us grow, was I wanted a feedback-oriented culture from day one. I'd met a lot of people working at startups who just generally had no idea what was going on. I had no idea how well they were doing. I had no idea what their manager thought of them. And I had no idea what the company's strategy was. And I just wanted us to have a really different culture from day one. And so McKinsey had a really feedback-oriented culture, like uncomfortably so for me. It was a lot. You basically get feedback every 2 to 4 weeks from someone. And there's usually a lot of constructive stuff. It's a bunch of type A people who want to get this thing rolling. So I probably wasn't overly constructive, but we also just gave each other a lot of good feedback early on, and people grew so much, I think. And I wanted everyone on the ship to feel like they were part, they had a key role in the ship. It was a lot easier when we were smaller, but, everyone was part of the strategy meeting. We had a weekly all hands meeting all the way up to, a couple of years ago when we moved it to a monthly, just because it was like way too many people meeting every week. And like, all right, not a lot's changed since last week. Maybe we should not do this every week. But early on, everything was changing every week. So it was super helpful to meet weekly. So those are a couple of things I could think of.
And I actually had 2 very random questions that they don't fit anywhere. So I'm just going to ask them here. One, is it stereotypical to assume that Texas is like the biggest cowboy shoe market? Or is there like another state or something?
Texas is definitely the largest market for cowboy boots, but it's not that much bigger than, say, California, New York, or Florida. They're pretty much indexed towards population, with Texas having definitely an over-index. I mean, the rule of thumb is that there are cowboy boots being sold everywhere if you just go outside the city. So if you live in Boston, if you live in Detroit, if you live in Chicago, if you just drive half an hour, basically in any direction, you'll see cowboy boots in the store, no matter where you are. So it's a pretty amazing phenomenon, actually. So yeah, New York's a big market. Pennsylvania is a big market for boots. Those are 2 big states. Michigan, Ohio. Yeah, all big markets over there.
My last question was just personal. Are these sold in like vegan leather too?
No, we haven't. We're really focused on quality, and our whole approach to sustainability is let's use leather from primarily from the food supply chain, and let's make boots and products that really last and let's stay out of the landfill. We really believe strongly in that and feel good about it. There are basically no vegan leathers that I know of that either aren't filled with petrochemicals, which are bad for the environment and break down very easily, or are made of some of the new leather developments that we're keeping our eye very closely on. But none of the newer leather developments that we've been able to find perform at even close to the level that cow leather performs at, for better, for worse.
Oh, that's really interesting.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so quality is the pillar. We care more about quality and long-lasting product than we do about experimenting at the expense of the consumer right now. But man, I'd love to have some more options. I mean, we like experimenting. We're trailblazing.
No, this is actually good to know. There's like a lot of plastic, the vegan leather stuff, and it just like falls apart. And I'm like, this is supposed to be the quote unquote sustainable option, and it's fallen apart in a day.
It's just plastic.
Yeah. Would you rather have it in the landfill, or, would you rather have some leather that's already being created anyway and it's going to last and stay out of the landfill?
Oh, makes a lot of sense. No, and I know we're almost right about at time. So just one last question to sort of wrap things up. You guys have made so much progress now, and I know you mentioned you're not in your double-digit years yet, but you're almost there. What is in store for the future for you guys? How do you think about the next few years?
Well, we keep going back to our mission. It's that next generation of Western. How can we continue to make an impact on the category? I think we made a pretty big impact on the category by making our core product line really great. We've got a lot of room to run on that front. I think the short answer to your question is we're going to be growing a lot, doing more of the same. We're opening amazing retail stores. We have 32 of them today. I think we're opening 10 plus this year. So you'll see a lot more. So I'd say for more people than not, you'll actually get a Tecovas store coming near you pretty soon in the next few years. So that'll be exciting. And you'll see us expand our tent a little bit. We've really made our mark with boots, but we're really just getting started on some of our other product lines to fill the shelves and, really introduce people to the world of Tecovas, and a lot more shirts and jeans flying off the shelf than there were a few years ago. And a lot more cowboy hats. Our cowboy hat business is going strong. So yeah, I'd say a lot's to come. I'd say if I had to pick one thing that would be new, we're going to be more focused on innovation moving forward. A lot of what we did early on, the innovation came in the model and in the service and in the culture. Our values and how we delivered it, the experience for the customer, and they're a little bit more intangible. Now we can put our trailblazing hat on. We've got a few brand pillars: authentic, trailblazing, and welcoming. And I think our trailblazing hat was very much focused on being D2C and being really good customer service, opening these stores and being courageous on that front. And now it's going to flow into the product as well. So more to come.
Thank you so much, Paul. This was fun.
Well, thanks, y'all. Those were great questions. I enjoyed it.
And that was our conversation with Paul. Dom, what was the lie?
That most cowboy boots are made in California. I think they're made in Mexico, right?
Yeah. I think that stuff is so interesting when you get into these kinds of, not niche industry, because cowboy boots are like not the most niche thing out there, but they're definitely more niche than like the world of sneakers. But like finding out that there's like literally one place where everyone goes to get stuff manufactured I just always find that super interesting. I don't know. I think supply chain is super interesting.
I know. It's kind of funny, too. Like, they all go to this one city in Mexico to get, like, the best leather ever so that they can make these boots. I actually love that. I don't know why. I just love how, like, everyone knows, like, this is the plug and this is where we go. And it's probably been, like he said, since the early 1900s or something. This is just how things are done. And I like the traditionalness, the history behind all of that.
For sure. Yeah. Because it's like, in theory, if you're coming in as a new brand and you want to do things differently, like maybe you'd think to try working with someone else or try, not doing what all the traditional brands are. But I think the fact that they did that, side note, would definitely like watch a documentary about this town. But it kind of leans into what I think Tecovas is trying to do, in the sense of being like, hey, like we know people want this product, but we're making it accessible in a different way, a little bit less of a price point. So I feel like going back to the tradition, like speaks very much to Paul and kind of like what they were trying to do.
Yeah, because cowboy boots are a really, really big thing. I mean, I'm from the South, so I've always known that. It feels like they're having like a massive thing on social media now. But I guess like he said, cowboy boots have always been a thing. Maybe I've just been in the city for too long.
I know. Yeah, we were talking before we recorded this that the one friend I have that has Tecovas lives in the city, but is from Texas. So definitely a little more tuned into that space than I am. Although I feel like all the girlies are wearing cowboy boots now, like at their Y2K wear and stuff
I know.
like that.
And it's interesting because I look at them and I'm still like, maybe it is growing up in the South where I'm just like, I wouldn't know. I'm not going to wear that. I see everyone's wearing it to like the Taylor Swift concerts and I was like, I still don't know. Time and place maybe. But I don't know. But that's just because it's like never been really my style. But cowboy boots are cute. They're cute. I might get them for Cowboy Carter, for Beyonce.
Yeah.
If I can get tickets. I hope she doesn't tour this year. Please don't. We're in a recession. But it was an interesting market for him to enter too. If you think about creating like a DCC brand in fashion, it was pretty brilliant to kind of see cowboy boots as this large, underappreciated market that it was.
For sure. Because I know for myself, I've always thought about getting a pair of boots. And I have literally always said like, yeah, well, my friend lives in Texas. When I go down to visit her, maybe I'll buy them then. Or like maybe when I'm in Denver, I'll buy them there. Like I've never even thought of buying them online. So him being like, there just wasn't a place to do so. And that's why you didn't think of it like that is like, well, yeah, I guess I can relate to that personally. Because I have thought about buying a pair for years and truly did not ever even once consider doing it online.
Yeah, I know. I never thought about how you got cowboy boots. Like when I saw someone wearing them, like you just wear them. Like you just appear with them on one day. I have no idea the logistics behind getting boots. Which so I guess it makes sense. Like, yeah, you would want these online. I would like to see some like Succession styled Devil Wears Prada drama behind this DTC entering into an industry where it's like traditional legacy boot makers and the fight to dominate the boot market. I'm creating an HBO show in my head right now because I think that the appetite is there to watch something like this.
Yeah. I'm picturing like a classic cowboy standoff at dawn or at sunset or something, like guns blazing. But like this company was so interesting for so many ways because we've been having a lot of D2C companies on the show recently. And one thing about them that stood out was his approach of being like, yeah, we're just launching a D2C company. And of course, now they're in retail too. But he was like, you can't launch a D2C company without physical sales, which I had never heard of a D2C company saying. So it was like interesting to him to be like, well, yeah, acquiring customers online is expensive. And like, while we think that's like what we're trying to do, it's like you need to start getting sales now. Like you need to get money in the door before you are able to kind of like tackle this like more expensive customer acquisition. So the fact that they started by doing physical sales despite the D2C hope and approach and things like that is just really interesting.
I mean, tough market, I imagine. But I'm actually glad that they kind of took a different approach in terms of understanding what they needed to do as a business in order to make it. And that there isn't this one playbook for D2C brands. Because it does make sense to have like physical sales first for a company like this, I think.
Yeah. I mean, D2C's had a very interesting period for the last decade of ups and downs. And I feel like shoes is one of those aspects too, where it's like, okay, I know there's a couple of shoe brands personally where it's like I bought shoes either in person or I did buy them online and was successful with it and then have realized that's like, oh, this is my size. Now I can buy them online. So it's like, I feel like this is like the perfect application for that. Oh, we want to be a D2C brand, meeting some people from the beginning, like people can try stuff on and then be like, oh, well, if my boots wear out or, oh, I want to get another pair, it's like they already know their size. They could just hop online and buy them.
Yeah.
Which I feel like is why shoe shopping, it was like, I don't want to say it was not what people did online first, but I feel like I didn't buy shoes online for quite a while.
Yeah, it's like kind of an intimate experience. You have to know the brand, trust the cut. Like you kind of have to know. I'm saying this as a shopaholic. I'm like, you have to build that consumer trust in my mind. How do I know that your boot is going to fit my foot? Like I have a narrow foot. Maybe sometimes some cuts you have to go up a size, maybe down a size, depending on how it is. And so I see shopping as a religious experience. You have to just know, you have to have that, there's a trust, a bond, at least for me, that comes with physical shopping, physical and online shopping. Because once you get to know a brand, you're like, okay, I can just buy it now. I can go online and get it.
Right.
But initially, you got to court each other, I think. I don't know.
I mean, I totally get it because there's just so many things still. And we've talked about this podcast that's like, okay, this is now available online. Cool. Like everyone's so easily jumping to buy that online. And then other things are like, hey, this is available online. And people are like, I don't know if I want to buy that online. It just like takes time to like rework your brain to discover like, oh yeah, that is something we now buy online that we never did before.
I know. There's so much stuff that we now buy online where like we weren't before.
But the other thing I want to talk about, Paul, which is very much switching gears. He's not the first person we've had on the show who's transitioned from being CEO to executive chairman. But I always think that talking to people about that process is so interesting because what he was saying about how he is super committed to the business, obviously he wants to help build things and do the creative stuff, but he didn't want to be a CEO because the CEO is largely like a process person and a hiring person. And it made me realize how many founder CEOs we have on who are literally like, essentially, I hate every aspect of the CEO job, but this is my company and I love running it. But it's like they don't actually like the CEO role. It's like good to see someone be like, well, yeah, so I made this transition so I could do all the things in the company I liked doing and thought I was good at and let someone else run the part that I don't want to do and the part that I'm not as good at.
I know. I wish more founders would take the time to realize if they were actually good CEOs or not and then take a step back. Some people are cut out for the job. A lot of people aren't.
No, it's so true. And you could say that for like a lot of other different areas too, where it's like there's so many jobs where it's like your next step to get promoted automatically involves managing people, for example. And it's like there's a lot of people who deserve that promotion or deserve to go to that next role who just are not good at or just straight up don't want to manage people. So it's like, it's funny to be like, I'm a founder. I have this great idea. I'm going to go build this company. And then it's like 5 years in, you're like, cool. So I'm like doing Zooms about hiring for this department and stuff. It's like, that's not what you want to do.
I know, right? Like knowing your strengths, finding your own product market fit, That is essential when running a business. So I don't know. I like hearing about founders who realize, CEO, not for me. I should not be doing this.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting what he said about relating it back to the fact that he was the only, like, a solo founder, in the sense of it's like, well, it's kind of like you have fewer options, then you can't have like another founder take over for you and stuff like that. So it definitely makes the process a little bit different.
Yeah, I know. I wonder, he worked at McKinsey. I had so many questions about, maybe this is me just stereotyping McKinsey. No, I think he brought this up a little bit about the way consulting is and the environment of consulting and how it kind of conforms you into one thing. And then suddenly you're a founder and you're in the Wild West. You're on a horse, you're running, you're free. I wish, well, I guess we could kind of talk about it, but the psychology of that is interesting. Going from working in these rigid environments to being free.
No, and people talk about that on the VC side too, especially when it was like 2 years ago, whenever like the big thing was like being an operator-led fund and stuff like that, which I mean, a lot of them already were, but everyone was just decided to start talking about it 2 years ago. But the point people were making where it's like, why would working at a consultant firm like McKinsey make you good at picking contrarian bets on startups in niche industries that don't exist yet? And so like, why would that make you good at it? And I was like,
hey,
that's a good point.
That's a really good point.
They are kind of, yeah, like, all right, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this company. I'll probably look at some boots, or maybe I was thinking about what else would they expand in, because I sent that photo of the high heel boots.
Oh my God.
The cowboy boot stilettos. That's what's next.
That's what's next. Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.